We continue our study of the 12 tribes, and this week we look at the tribe of Asher. Now, just a little background in case you've not been watching all these videos. Let me give you the genealogy of this family. Jacob, of course, has as a son of Isaac and the grandson of Abraham begins to build his family, and it's quite a large family. It eventually becomes the 12 tribes of Israel, and we're looking at each one of these men as they're born, realizing that their legacy is they're going to be a very large tribe in Israel, some larger, some smaller. So far, we've talked about Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, who are all the sons of Jacob through Leah. And then Rachel's not had any children yet. She is barren. And so she decides to give Bilhah to Jacob so that she might become maybe a surrogate mother, might be the term we would understand today. And she has Dan and Naphtali. And then comes along Leah and says, well, if Rachel can do that, I can do it as well. And she gives Zilpah to Jacob. And by the way, Zilpah and Bilhah are both called the wives of Jacob. And so Zilpah has a son named Gad. We looked at that last time, and now tonight we're going to be looking at Asher. So Asher is a tribe that we're going to give some attention to and try to learn, as we have with other tribes in these studies of the first family, of try to get some character lessons from him. And the name Asher means happy. Let's look at his birth. This is in Genesis chapter 30, verse 13. And Leah said, happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed. And she called his name Asher. So Asher means happy. That silly little song you get in your head, don't worry, be happy. He's just happy. He's like the pre-introduction of the seven dwarfs. He's happy, Asher. So that gives you some disposition about his personality and the kind of guy that he will be, one that maybe wants to mind his own business and just get along and be a happy-go-lucky guy, we might say. So Asher's life begins in this family. He's got 4 older half-brothers. He's got 2 more half-brothers over here with Dan and Naphtali, and then he's got a full-blooded brother named Gad. And we imagine that all of these sons are born pretty close to each other, because it amazes later when Joseph sits them in birth order, it shocks them that anybody could be able to do that. He has to have some inside information. Of course, he's a brother. They don't know he's a brother. But they also much look alike. I mean, how would you guess if they're 18 months apart, which one's older and which one's younger, if they pretty much look alike? And so Asher and Gad are probably born pretty close to each other, maybe a year or 2 years, the guess is. So Asher's born into this growing family. He's the 8th son. So then we come to the next event in Asher's life that's going to affect him and affect his brothers greatly, and it's probably the kind of thing that you would read about on Dr. Phil, or even worse, Jerry Springer, and that's Genesis chapter 35. And it tells us there that something goes on that is really amiss for the family and must have caused great chaos, although not much is said about it in the scripture. But it says in Genesis chapter 35, verse 22, and it came to pass when Israel dwelt in the land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine. Elsewhere she's called his wife. And Israel heard it. And now the 12 sons of Jacob, then it gives you a genealogy. So here in Genesis 35:22, Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob through Leah, has a sexual relationship with Bilhah. I don't know what to call her in relationship to him, because this is really convoluted. It's not his stepmother, I don't think. Maybe you can work that out in your mind. It's just a weird relationship. But I want you to see how it must affect, he's got two brothers. So Dan and Naphtali's mama has a sexual relationship with Reuben, which betrays Jacob. Jacob doesn't say much about it here. He just heard it. He heard it happen, and that's it. And then you're not told more about it until Genesis chapter 49 when Jacob brings it up to Reuben on his deathbed. But I want you to think, the reason I bring that up is I want you to think about the dynamics of this family and all the inner workings and all the jealousies and all the envies. And envy is going to play a very important part in the life of Rachel's son, Joseph, as we get closer to looking at him. But this is the family that we're talking about. Now turn to Genesis 37. And Genesis 37 introduces us to Joseph. So we're going to get a little ahead of ourselves in our study, and it's impossible not to do this when studying these sons. You just can't separate one son from all the others and solely focus on him. You have to bring some of the other brothers into it, like Reuben, and now like Joseph. Joseph, just to remind you, is the son of Jacob, just like all of them are. But Joseph is the son of Rachel. Rachel eventually is going to have children. She has two children, Joseph and Benjamin, and we'll study them in detail a little while in a study. But right now we want to look at Asher in relationship to Joseph. And here's what it says in Genesis 37, verse 1. And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Now he's feeding, doing shepherding work. Maybe one of these guys are his mentor, teaching him how to be a shepherd. Although he probably knew quite a bit based upon the life of David. David was quite a shepherd when he was a teenage boy. But nonetheless, he's down there, Joseph is down there with all his brothers feeding the flock. But then that verse focuses on the sons of Zilpah and Bilhah, which is going to be Dan and Naphtali and Gad and Asher, those four. And he brings to his father an evil report. Now we don't know what that means, except we take the wording for what it says. And it's an evil report. What were they doing? We don't know. But it just wasn't that they were lazy or they were lollygagging or they were doing something evil. And takes that report to Jacob. And that sets in motion a series of events that's going to rock Jacob's life and rock their brothers' lives and really affect Joseph's lives, because later they sell him into slavery. And then the story of Joseph goes on. We'll set that aside for a moment. But I want you to see that Asher and Gad and Naphtali and Dan were all involved in this experience of where they had an evil report brought against them. Nobody likes a tattletale. Nobody likes to be told on. And you can imagine that their reaction was very negative, and they probably had a conversation and a get-together, all the brothers, about, hey, man, we can't put up with this. We just can't have this happen. And we know what the story is. They set out to kill Joseph at first, and then they sell him into slavery. Now, as the usual, let's go to Genesis 49, because Genesis 49 gives us the genealogy of Jacob as he gives to his sons his last will and testament. And he goes through each son and talks to them and either gives them a great blessing, or he may call them on the carpet, such as Reuben, for what they've done and for what Levi and Simeon done in their event of Genesis chapter 34 involving Dinah. But now we come to Asher, and here's what it says about Asher in Genesis 49, verse 20. Out of Asher his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. So we have royal dainties, fat. Asher's going to be a rich guy. He's going to get very rich. And I'll show you more about that in a moment, but first let's turn to Deuteronomy 33. For in Deuteronomy 33, this is another weekly pass-by we do. Genesis 49 is Jacob's blessings upon his sons. And Deuteronomy 33 is the blessings of Moses upon the 12 tribes. And he gives us Asher's message in Deuteronomy 33:24. And of Asher he said, let Asher be blessed with children. He ends up having 7 sons. Let him be acceptable to his brethren. Let him get along with them. Happy guy. And let him dip his foot in oil. Thy shoes shall be iron and brass, and as thy days shall thy strength be. That's a great little verse there to put in the back of your head. As thy days, so shall thy strength be. A great promise to claim even today, that God's going to give you the strength you need for what you face today. But that comes in the blessing of Moses to Asher. And so he's got royal dainties, fat. Doesn't mean that he's physically fat. It just means that he's blessed with greatness and with possessions, and then oil. Now that's not the kind of oil you think about when you think about petrol and motor oil out of Saudi Arabia. It's olive oil, because Asher's land here is connected with olive trees. Olive trees are important in the Bible because it's the cherubim in the Holy of Holies. They're built of olive wood, and the doors are built of olive wood. Now they're covered with gold after that. But it's the olive and the olive oil that's used for keeping the lamps burning. So it's a great commodity for the tribe of Asher to have. Also, you have these lands that are connected with the Great Sea. And Asher, as you can see, and Dan and the western side of Manasseh are all connected with the Great Sea. It even goes down here to Judah in some places. They're connected to the Great Sea. But it's Asher and Dan who take advantage of that sea and sea life and fishing and all the abilities and opportunities that come with being connected with that Mediterranean Sea. And Asher gets rich as a result of that. So he's a happy guy, rich guy, gets along with his brethren, with maybe the sore exception later to come with Joseph. But you come to Asher and it's not like, okay, man, I got a bad taste in my mouth because of Reuben and him sleeping with Jacob's concubine. And I got a bad taste in my mouth because of Simeon and Levi, because they use circumcision as a weapon against others. Asher, it's pretty good so far. But then we run into a thing here. Well, let's get this first. Deuteronomy 33, 24. Then let's go to Judges chapter 5. And Judges chapter 5 tells us something about Asher that makes us take perhaps a different view of him. Judges chapter 5. Now, in the context of what's happened here, the Lord is raising up judges. That's why the book is named Judges. And some of the famous judges are Gideon and Samson, Jephthah. And so there's no man to stand up, and God raises up Deborah, Judges chapter 4, and Deborah's going to go into battle against Sisera, and no man will stand up. And finally Barak steps forward as the general, and she says, go to war. And he says, I won't go to war unless you go with me. And Deborah says, well, if I go to war with you, then the Lord's going to give the victory to a woman. That ends up being Jael when she drives the spike into the temple of Sisera. So when that's all over, when the battle is over, she has an after action report. And in Judges chapter 5, verse 17, here's what she says about Asher and Dan. Why abodest thou among the sheepfolds to hear the bleatings of the flocks? For the divisions of Reuben there were great searchings of heart, and Gilead abode beyond Jordan. And why did Dan remain in the ships? Asher continued on the seashore and abode in his breeches. But then you have Zebulun and Naphtali who jeopardized their lives unto death. So you have some who go in and fight and show great courage, and then you have others like Reuben and Dan and Asher who just, they're out on their ships. We're too busy. Asher's too busy with making money, gathering his commodities, working the stock market, whatever it is he's doing to try to make a little more money. How much money is enough money? Just a little more. And so Asher just ignores, and Deborah calls him out for it and says, you've got to do better than that. And I think that rebuke made a difference in Asher's life. You never know when a rebuke is going to make a person sit up and take notice. Don't be afraid to tell someone that they're doing something wrong. Don't be afraid to confront them with something that might be a blind spot to them. And so he's rebuked, and then what happens in Judges chapter 6, and again to give you the context, this is the story of Gideon, and Gideon has to raise an army, and part of that army comes from, of course, the 12 tribes. And in Judges chapter 5, verse 35, he sent messengers throughout Manasseh, who also gathered after him, and he sent messengers unto Asher and unto Zebulun and unto Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. So he sends all these people out to come to war, and Asher sends some men to fight. He set out the fight with Deborah in chapter 4. I'm too busy with fishing. She rebukes him, and now when Gideon makes the call, they go. And so he makes up this battle. And then Judges chapter 7, verse 23, tells us, and the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali, out of Asher, and out of Manasseh, and pursued after the Midianites. So he is part of the battle that takes place. He has some men among the 300 who are there to fight against Gideon, and then when the Midianites run for their lives, all these men gather and chase the enemy of God. So we have to say that from chapter 4 to chapter 6 and chapter 7, Asher makes a dramatic turnaround. He sets out the battle here, and then he steps up in the next battle and says, I want to be part of this taking place. Now, a couple of more things that we learn about Asher, and that is when they do the count in the book of Numbers for their census, and there's two censuses in the book of Numbers. There's a census at the beginning of the book, and there's a census at the end of the book. And the census at the beginning of the book are the people who are 20 years old and older who are going to die in the wilderness. And then they do a census at the end of the book of Numbers, and it's the people who have survived the wilderness because they were too young. They were under the age of 20. Everyone 20 and older has died. And now the new census shows, well, how many people have we gained or lost during this 40 years of wilderness? And Asher, at the end of, in the second census, at the end of the wilderness journeys, has 53,400 fighting men, and that's approximately 12,000 people that have gone up in number. So they've increased in the wilderness. The only tribe that is larger than Asher is the tribe of Manasseh, and you can see how much territory they gained. But they also gained during the wilderness journey. Some of them, like Simeon, really shrank during that period of wilderness, but he was blessed. Now to finish up, let's go to 1 Chronicles chapter 7, and I'll show you an interesting thing here. Now 1 Chronicles, I'll get you in 1 Chronicles, especially the first 9 chapters. If you know what's in here, you might groan a little bit and go, man, what in the world is going to be found out of here that's going to be helpful to us? And of course, there is something helpful here. It's 1 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 30. We see the sons of Asher, Emma and Ushua and Isbai and Berai and Sarah, their sister. So he mentions these sons, and one of them is named Berai. So that's the grandson of Jacob, the great-grandson of Isaac, and the great-great-grandson of Abraham, just to follow the line. Asher has a son named Berai, and that name, this is just off the track for a moment. But he mentions Sarah. Now that's not Sarah, Abraham's Sarah. Perhaps she's named after her great-great-grandmother, possibly. But her name's Sarah, and she's also called Sarah in the Bible. That's all we know about her. But she's named. And God sometimes will do that. He'll just drop a name in the Bible and say, well, there that person is. I don't know if you ever contemplate them. That's a real person who lived a real life, and she grew up, likely married, likely had children, went on with her life, lived a full life. She gets a mention in the Bible. And I think that just shows us that we can't get weary in well-doing, thinking we're unnoticed, because God does take notice. And sometimes He'll just drop those things in the Bible to show us. One guy's mentioned because he went out and found some ashes in the wilderness. And that's all it says about him. So how would you like to be known for that? Well, at least he's in the Bible. And Sarah, is in the Bible. So as a daughter of Asher, but it's Berai that I want you to notice, because it goes on down. I'm going to skip some here. And it says in verse 40, and all these were the children of Asher, heads of their father's houses, choice and mighty men of valor, chief of the princes. And the number throughout the genealogies of them that were apt to war and to the battle was 26,000 men. Now you read there, that is the line of Eber. And Eber, the family of Eber, has 26,000 plus fighting men, mighty for war. You see how far Asher's come? I don't know, cowardly, I don't know, indifferent certainly. Didn't want to have anything to do with that battle that took place in Deborah's day. Steps up in this battle with Gideon, and by the time you come to 1 Chronicles, they are ready for war. And they are, and these are the grandsons and the great-grandsons of Asher, who are pointed out with great valor. Now let's go to 2 Chronicles chapter 30. 2 Chronicles chapter 30. And verse 11. And in the context of this incident, I've got to give you a little background so we'll understand the verse. At this point, the children of Israel have split into the 10 northern tribes and the 2 southern tribes. Asher's among the 10 northern tribes. They follow Jeroboam. Judah follows Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. And since the tribe of Judah contains Jerusalem and the Levites are near the tabernacle and serving there, the temple, serving in the temple, that's where all the sacrifices go. And Jeroboam, at the beginning of his rebellion against God, says, I can't have these people going down to Jerusalem, because if they go down to Jerusalem, then they're going to be perhaps tempted to go back to God. So he set up 2 golden calves. And he told the people, all the 10 tribes, he said, these are your gods that brought you out of Egypt. These are the gods you're to worship. Don't go down to Jerusalem and worship God there. And it became such a sin and such a sticking point for God that God mentions it all the time throughout Kings and Chronicles when it mentions Jeroboam. He'll even compare people to Jeroboam. He'll say of perhaps Ahab, he'll say, now he sinned against me, but he never reached the sin of Jeroboam. Jeroboam was the apex of evil and rebellion against God. So when there's an opportunity with Hezekiah, Hezekiah becomes king over the southern tribes, and he's a good king, and he humbles himself before God, and he calls all of Israel to come and worship in Jerusalem, and let's have a revival. And it says in 2 Chronicles chapter 30, verse 11, nevertheless, divers of Asher, Manasseh, Zebulun humbled themselves and came to Jerusalem. If you look back in verse 10, it's Ephraim, Manasseh, Zebulun laughed and scorned and mocked them. So you got some who are saying, oh man, this is a joke. Why would you even go down there? The peer pressure, of trying to keep somebody from doing right. And despite that, Asher was among those who went down, humbled themselves, and went down into the southern tribes to Jerusalem, the center of worship for God, humbled themselves and took participation in that. So Asher didn't care what people thought about him. Humbled himself. Humility is a great quality of the Christian life. Now, before honor is humility. We learn that from Jesus Christ. Before the crown is the cross. And so Asher goes down and humbles himself, and that's going to be something to see. And he's also mentioned in Revelation chapter 6 and Ezekiel chapter 48 as being part of that group of people who's going to receive the 12,000 of each tribe receive the mark of God so they can't be harmed, 144,000 of them. And this is interesting to me. I don't know what it means. But when he mentions calling out the 12 tribes that are going to be marked by God for protection, Judah's first, Reuben second, Gad is third, and Asher is fourth. There's Gad and Asher. And they've elevated to the point that now among the numbering of the tribes, Asher's the last one mentioned by Moses. But here in this list, Gad third, Asher, and it's A-S-E-R, that's New Testament. That's just the spelling in the New Testament. Asher is fourth. And then he's also mentioned in Ezekiel 48, 2 and 3 as being part of that millennial temple. Now I want to close by giving you the most famous person who's mentioned in the Bible from the tribe of Asher. Some tribes we don't have anybody named that we can really remember. All the tribes had mighty men. All the tribes had valiant men. All the tribes had famous men. The Bible says so, but we don't remember their names. But there's certain people in the Bible who come from certain tribes we remember instantly because they are not only famous in Israel, they're famous across the world. David, for example, comes from the tribe of Judah. Jesus Christ, I should mention him first, comes from the tribe of Judah. From the tribe of Levi, if I ask you to, can you name anybody that comes from Levi? You'd say, well, of course, Moses or Miriam or Aaron and many others, John the Baptist, all come from the tribe of Levi. But about the tribe of Asher, there's only one person who really stands out. And she's found in Luke chapter 2, verse 36. And let's get the reading there. And there was one Anna, prophetess, the daughter of Phinehel of the tribe of Asher. She was of great age and had lived with an husband 7 years from her virginity. And she was a widow of about 80 years. So she's about 84. Which departed not from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers night and day. And she, coming in that instant, gave thanks likewise unto the Lord, and spoke of him to all that looked for redemption in Jerusalem. So there's the story of Simeon and Anna in Luke chapter 2 around the birth of Jesus Christ. And when she sees that all these things are taking place, she gives glory to God that the Redeemer has come. And it's an 84-year-old woman named Anna who gives herself to fasting and prayer. She sees the Redeemer. And what makes her famous is that event but she's connected with the tribe of Asher. And you can read in her words there, she is ecstatic. She is happy to have had the chance to have an encounter with the Messiah, the long-promised coming Messiah who would redeem Israel from their sins. Hope you've learned something from Asher of the Old New Testament, Asher of the Old Testament, and this has been a help to you and a blessing to you, and we'll have more of these studies coming in the weeks. God bless you.